Is a conversation for Black History Month 2024. My name is Kayla and I'm the administrator for the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance. And I'm very pleased to be joined by Clancy Williams, the director of Angels Without Wings, a training and drama psychotherapy service based in Birmingham. Angels Without Wings create holistic training packages to support paradigm shifts in thinking, feeling, behaviours, and ultimately healing, with a keen passion around social justice, women and children's rights, and the effects of trauma on the psyche of individuals, families, and amongst generations. So thank you so much, Clancy, for being with us today.
Thank you,
And
Kayla.
I was just hoping you could start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and the origins of your work.
Yeah, sure. Just listening to that intro that you read, it kind of makes me think about just how far forward I have become since writing and putting those words together. And as we go along in our discussion, I'm sure that will become clearer. So when people ask me to kind of think about my origin story, I have to bring in, those ancestors that have gone before myself. So, thinking about my mother who transitioned coming up to a couple of years ago now, and my grandmother and my great grandmother, really strong, independent women that kind of set the foundation and set the pathway for us girls to kind of come through. And when I think about that start in life, Kayla, what I've always had a sense of is my mother was always about people. She was always about people. She was always about gathering. She understood the pressures that was experienced in society when she came here in the late 50s. And she was one of these stalwarts that would bring people together to eat, to socialize, to fellowship, to share, to sing, to dance. If there was a party to be had, it would be at my mother's. And, so I kind of had that instilled in me very, very early on, the importance of connection, the importance of community. She was part of the first founders of the Preston Caribbean Club back in the 60s, and they pooled their money together, in the partner process. And, they just got busy with it. They did community and they knew what that was about. So I've always had that in me about, I'm not just here by chance. That's one of the things she used to share with us. And I'm not just here for myself. And the community within which I was born into, both my parents are from the beautiful nature Isle of Dominica. And, even going back there and rediscovering that the original name for Dominica actually is Waitikibuli. But when the colonizers came over, they changed the name to Dominica. And I'm hoping that the current Prime Minister, who is from the Kalinago community, will change it back to Waitikibuli. But and again, so all that history around and all that understanding around connection and community, that's where that came from, Kayla. So as I kind of went through life, I've always engaged with community, supported community, and in particular, supported the African and African Caribbean community, because that's what I knew and that's what I was kind of born into. So to say that it's part of the DNA of me is a bit of an understatement. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about Angels Without Wings and how those traditions and your culture fed into the development of the organization as a whole.
Yeah, I think when I was coming to the end of my MA, I studied at Derby University and had a real challenging experience within that. So I'm clinically trained as a drama psychotherapist. That's what my title is, or drama therapist. And so the foundation of that MA is based on creativity and dramatic expression, and recognizing that we don't only experience trauma intellectually or psychologically, we feel it through the body first and foremost. And so when you're working with people who find the traditional talking therapies a challenge, what was natural to me was about embodiment, how your body's responding to the trauma, and how can we utilize creative expression in order to alleviate some of that pressure, support people to transition through their trauma, having a real connection with their body, whilst being able to process some of the historical challenges that are often at the root of where somebody's trauma lies. Now, the reason why that was natural for me is because, as somebody from originating from the Caribbean Isles, by way of Africa, the rhythm and the body is so integral to us, right?
That's right.
It's absolutely part of our DNA in terms of who we are. And when we can't find the words in the ways that we want to express ourselves, we utilize our bodies. And nothing more fundamental and profound has come from that as the carnivals that we are, that people are part of. And that is, for me, feels like part of the ultimate expression of us as people from the Africa, who hail from the Africas and have been, through the Caribbeans in order to get through to some of the places that we find ourselves now here in the UK and other parts of Europe.
That's right.
And so when I was coming to the end of my degree, I had to think about, what was it? I knew that I didn't want to be employed. I knew that as soon as I qualified, I wanted to set up my own business and do things my way. Because as Errol Dunkley says, every man does his thing a little ways different. So I thought, right, I want to do my thing a little ways different. And so one of the things that people always used to say to me when they'd encountered me, although I didn't always feel it myself, was people would come away and say, "Oh, Clancy, do you know what? You're a real angel, you are. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't, kind of come across you and this, that, and the other." And then I just kind of put this together, because I wasn't thinking about the white European Western angel coming down from heaven with, white wings. I was thinking more of the angelic presence of the virtues with which, I encompass now of Ma'at, the deity that looks at reciprocity, peace, harmony, balance, and the other virtues. And so it just kind of became something that was natural to kind of think about myself as this angel. I haven't got wings. And so the phrase came, angels without wings. And whilst it's had, it has been challenged, I absolutely stick with it, because there is something about the notion around spirituality that Western psychotherapeutic practice is only just becoming familiar with. And yet I knew, as well as that kind of natural rhythm about us, we have an innate understanding about spirituality. And here I'm not talking about religion and the way that the West has kind of coined and indoctrinated people with religion, but I'm talking about that intuition, that internal insight that I believe every soul has. But if you have enough trauma experienced in your former and early years, it will get piled on top of that innate spiritual intuition that we have. And so then the angels without wings are there to help us be able to remove those traumatic experiences in order for that intuition to be reconnected with the individual, so that they can be the ones that take control and move their life forward, as opposed to a system or a structure that dictates to you how you're supposed to live and how you can get through, without enabling you to connect with that divine self that I think is the fundamental seat of where our innate natural intuition and way of being lives.
Lovely.
That was quite a long-winded way of explaining where Angels Without Wings came from.
No, it was wonderful because I wanted to talk to you about the 7 principles of Ma'at and how you implement that within your practice anyway. So you weaved that in beautifully. So thank you. I just wanted to delve a little bit deeper into how do you, when you spoke about the layers of trauma kind of quietening that intuition that we have within ourselves and that ability to listen to what's going on inside, how do you go about forming those pathways and that reconnection to oneself through your work, because we're so far removed in terms of where we are as a people from our original homelands, and on top of that, the way the environments we lived in, the way we're raised. So how do you get back to that?
Well, that's a really great question, because it's a journey that I've had to go on myself as well, Kayla, because I think before I have a phenomenal clinical supervisor called Ramari Mukam, who runs a African-centered organization in Birmingham called Patakif Therapy Services. And it was actually with her support that I embarked upon the journey into and around African and Black psychology. And what that journey started me on, there's a beautiful doctor by the name of Dr. Naim Akbar, and he has a very small series of books that are so accessible for people of African and African Caribbean origin. I recommend it to everybody. And one of his books is about Know Thyself.
Okay.
And I think fundamentally, Kayla, that is the starting point. If Malcolm, Bob Marley tells us, didn't he? If you don't know your history and you don't know where you're coming from, we right from the get-go, we've got a problem, right?
Right.
If we are embedded and wedded to somebody else's history, we've got a problem. And if we are not exposed and immersed in our truth and our history, we have no leg to stand on in terms of understanding who we are. So the little booklet around Know Thyself is where I start, in terms of when I'm in front of an individual, I want to know, in the same way that you asked me about my origin story, tell me about your origin story. Because in that story, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, in that origin story are the nuggets that you are going to need to move yourself forward. Either because there are some lies that you're going to have to put to one side, and we have had to work on and dispel, one of the biggest lies that we've had to fundamentally deal with in terms of Black inferiority and white superiority.
Yes.
So fundamental, if we're even starting from that point, it is my responsibility to instill, particularly in relation to people of African and African Caribbean origin, a clear understanding of the rich heritage of which they come from.
That's right.
So when you start there, you then have an opportunity to build self-worth and self-value. Once you're able to instill that, then the individual begins to see the issue not as themselves, not that they are the issue, but be able to see we are a product of the environment within which we are trying to get to the place of not surviving, but thriving.
That's right.
We have a right, Kayla, to thrive. It is not good enough for us to think that we have to be in these societies that tell us that we have to be tolerant. Tolerant is a word that I really do not use in my practice, because tolerance makes me feel of, oh, I'm having to put up with.
That's
And when
right.
we continue to live as though people have to put up with us being present, then that takes away a sense of who I
Who
am
we
as an
are.
individual. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my starting point right there, is who are you? Who are
It's
you? And getting people to that place of know thyself, know who you are, discover who you are, reconnect, remember, and remind yourself of who you are. Because we have millennia of examples of the strength and beauty and dignity of who we are. Not because we are in a situation now where that could be questioned in relation to, this notion that they've given us now on black violence, quote, and having an understanding of where that comes from and the history and how that is perpetuated and how we find ourselves in that situation now. So, I think once I can get to a place where I can almost reintroduce individuals to who they are, and reintroduce them to themselves, and reintroduce them to the ancestors that have gone before. And Kayla, that isn't me being romantic about life, because I know some
yes.
children and some young people have had, you know, horrendous starts in life. But that doesn't take away from who they are, because their primary caregiver or the person who was responsible for them had their own stuff that they were dealing with. That doesn't mean that they aren't still, the beautiful being that they were originally supposed to be. And helping them see that and getting them back to that place is my mission.
It's an incredible mission. I know from my experiences, when I think about my own children and trying to, because they're out in the world, right? They go to school every day, they see
Right,
things, that
right,
they're probably the only Black children in their classes. And they have these conversations with us in the safety of our home, but then they
right,
go out into the world and it's something completely different that they have to navigate. And it's
right,
instilling them with that self-worth, that foundation, so that when they go out into these environments, they don't lose sight of who they are. And I just find that
right.
really interesting in regards to what you were saying, especially that you work with young people quite a lot as well. And
Yeah,
in that, um, in that, what you were saying, that reconnection and showing them who they are, how do you manage to, because when they're with you and you're doing the work, that's fine, but when they're going back out into these environments, back into
yeah,
those places that might not feel safe, that aren't representative,
right.
how do we instill that in them so that they don't lose that sense of self when they go out into the world, you know?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said about, the different theories and the different approaches that kind of
Mm,
support some of the work, that I do, in terms of, I also do, as I mentioned, the work with Patty Therapy. So we currently run a diploma in African-centered therapy practice and praxis. And that looks at how we train clinicians to be aware of Black psychology and thinking about, if we are only going to use the derogatory frameworks that Freud and Jung and all those other theorists left us, then we are only going to replicate that. And I would have said before I went on this journey, Kayla, I would have been a white European practitioner, but in blackface. It wasn't until I was exposed to and shown had the opportunity to understand around Black psychology and the notion of fundamentally who we are as a people, and that some of our historical indigenous rites, rituals and practices, how meaningful that they are and how we've often overlooked them. So being able to sit with somebody to kind of do that origin story and take them further back in their origin history than maybe that they are aware of, in order that they can see these really rich, powerful, strength-based individuals whose lineage, I don't care how far back it goes, how far back, but if we are going to do the work around Ma'at, has to be an understanding about oneness, and that we are all connected, and that through our ancestors we have the opportunity to be able to build that a sense of who we are and fundamentally whose we are. So when you're working with somebody and all you have is verbal language to work with them, what do you do if somebody doesn't have that kind of intellectual ability or capacity? But if you show imagery, and you use metaphors, which I absolutely love me a good metaphor, and also some of the really fundamental quotes and affirmations that kind of stand us in good stead to rebuild self in and out of the therapeutic space.
That's right.
And also reminding people, I'm looking outside now, Kayla, because nature is such a giver. She doesn't hold back in giving, and we totally underestimate. I think now Europeans are beginning to understand what it is when we used to be kind of, it was interesting when Europeans first went to the Caribbean, and we'd be picking our herbs and we'd be putting our spices together and we'd be healing each other, healing things the natural way.
From the earth,
Now there is this real explosion of understanding about what nature has to offer. And I think we've had that historically. And again, even if I'm working with young guys who may be on the verge of exploitation or gang violence or gangs, and taking a group of guys out to walk in the country and just getting them to just talk to me about what you see. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you see. We're going to sit on the grass. You're going to take your shoes off. All those things that people historically they've never done before. But you take them away and outside of the environment in order for them to experience something of nature, to sit in nature, to be with nature,
to be moved by it,
and to be moved by
for it to shift something internally.
Right. And for them to know that, okay, rather than go to a club or whatever to get their release or whatever it is that they need, nature has it. Nature has it. I got nothing wrong with you people going to a club or whatever. But what I also want you to understand is nature has what you need, and she will give you in abundance. And just getting people to kind of feedback what is it that they got from that experience, and to hear you know, young guys say, I've never heard stillness like this. Where I am, I don't get any stillness. I don't get any peace.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know there was, you know, I'm pointing out all the different trees, the oaks, the birch, the sandalwood, the this, the, you know, the holly, the you know, all different things, getting them to make wreaths out of
Mm-hmm.
nature and come away with something that they've, you know, gone out and made. Or we might be doing foraging for all different berries and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
really immersing them into that world which has been buried because of all the other things that have come into play, to take them away from those things. So
Mm-hmm.
nature is one of those beautiful things. And also, I encourage people to do journal writing.
Mm-hmm.
And journal writing and journaling, for me, are two different things.
Okay.
Journal writing is for, you know, some people like that. We generally know what that is, don't we? It's
Mm-hmm.
where you know, some people do it daily. They write their thoughts, their feelings, everything that's gone not so well, etc., etc. The
Right.
journaling that I introduce people to is much more creative. It's
Mm-hmm.
much more freeing. It's much more liberating. And whilst they may be reflecting on something that didn't go right, what I want to know is, well, what did you do about it?
Mm-hmm.
What did you sit and think? What was the first of all, the negative internal chatter, I call it, that was causing you to think, okay, this didn't work well, this didn't go right. What did you do based on some of the techniques that we've been introducing over the weeks?
Mm-hmm.
But also, how are you going to document that? There might be an image that comes to mind. There might be a color that comes to mind. They may have been walking out in nature and, you know, as often happens with me, a feather comes floating by and I think,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, who's with me today? Which one of the ancestors are with me today?
Mm-hmm.
Or they may be feeling a particular way and they go out and they find, I don't know, a leaf that had, you know, autumn just bursts into color, doesn't it, with all the different colors of the leaves changing, reds, oranges. So I get people to think about, what does the autumn of their life look like?
Mm-hmm.
Draw it for me, paint it for me, write some lyrics about it for me. Tap into your creativity because it is in there. And I'm always amazed when I then leave maybe clients for 2 or 3 months and then I say to them, bring your journal in. Let's have a see what you've
Have a
been
look.
doing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Kayla, I'm just blown away by some of the image making. And I know arts therapists, traditional arts therapists, will
Mm-hmm.
absolutely love this because it's a term that they use a lot. And it's a term that our ancestors did a lot of image making, a lot of mark making. When you see the hieroglyphics, you know, and the shapes that they made and how they depicted symbols and signs, and you can see some of that coming out in people's drawings and the images that they are making. Now, the average person looking at it might not be able to make mean, you know, well, what's all this scratching and colours and whatever.
Yeah.
But when they give understanding to what that image meant for them and the release that they get as a result of doing that,
Mm-hmm.
powerful.
Of course. Everybody should have the opportunity to tell their own story creatively, you know, and a lot of the
Yeah,
time I feel it's environmental, it's mental, but also it's an access issue, isn't it? A
right,
lot of inner city kids from the Black communities don't nature doesn't feel accessible to them. I
right,
I recently did a podcast with a young lady called Quessia. She has her own organization called City Girl in Nature,
right.
and she does amazing work with young Black people within the community and just enabling them the freedom to explore it and
Yeah,
understand that it is for you, because I think
yes,
that's the thing a lot of the time,
yes,
isn't it? We're
yeah,
kind of we're made to believe it's not for you,
right,
even though, as you've just expressed, This is
Yeah.
inherently part of who we are
Yeah.
through our traditions, our rituals, our ancestors. We were out there. We were nourishing ourselves from the earth. We were gathering those herbs.
Right.
We were curing illness,
Yes.
we were putting our feet on the ground and grounding ourselves and feeling those
Right.
vibrations that come through the earth,
Absolutely.
all
Absolutely.
of that. And
Yeah.
that's just been, we've just been told in this westernized society that that's not for you, you
Right.
know?
Right. And isn't it interesting, because what I don't think we've been great at doing, Kayla, is having the conversation about where some of this historically comes from. Because if we were to think about our origin stories,
Mhm.
our origins are us being out in the country. Our
Mhm.
origins is about being out in nature. But then, you know, our forefathers and foremothers came over here to this island, and were then cocooned into these and concrete environments,
Mhm.
which we are supposed to call home.
Homes.
We're supposed to call those boxes
Mhm.
homes,
And we're all piled on top of one
and we're
another.
all either we're piled on top of this way, and we're also
Mhm.
piled that way, because we
That's
only
right.
get as my mum used to call them, a 2 by 2 house within which to live in, where she's come from a whole, a
Yeah,
whole, what to all intents and purposes to me would be a field,
that's right.
and her house is in the middle of it.
Mhm.
And so we've almost, they've deliberately um, funneled us into this concrete environment where, it's difficult to grow. But
Mm.
just like Tupac Shakur taught us, a rose can grow through concrete, right?
That's right.
Right. So, and that's again another lovely metaphor that I like to use with
Mhm.
with with particularly with young men, because that harsh exterior is there for a reason, Kayla. They have
Mhm.
to survive, and part of being harsh is to try to make sure that they do survive.
Mhm.
But the consequence of that is that they don't then allow for the rolls to come through that concrete.
Mhm.
And I think we have to be, that has to be more available for particular,
1000%.
for people, for our youngest to be able to experience that
Yeah.
growing through the concrete. And so I feel that there almost needs to be a reclaiming of that countryside,
Mhm.
because we are country people. We are, that's where we
Yeah.
thrive, when we are in nature, when we are out in the elements, when we are growing, planting, sowing, and reaping.
Mhm.
Like you mentioned, when we're able to just go out on the patch of where we are and put our feet on the
Mhm.
ground and feel the vibration and the energy of the of
Mhm.
the elements around us.
Mhm.
So, I years ago made a conscious effort to move out into the country for that
Did
reason.
you? Oh,
Now, has it had its challenges? Of course it has.
yeah.
I've lived in inner city London. I've lived in Birmingham.
Mhm.
And now I live outside of those areas. But yes, it has its challenges. But when I'm out in nature,
Yeah.
Kayla, that for me was a trade-off I was willing to make. And I
Mm.
think more of us need to do it, because
We
that
do.
those spaces are for us. Like
Yes.
you were saying, the young woman who's trying to let the young people know in London that these
Mm.
in the inner spaces, because there are some really lovely green spaces in
There
and around
are.
London, but these spaces are for them too.
Mhm.
And that's exactly what I thought. I thought, actually, no, I have a right to reclaim some of this land
Mhm.
because my forefathers and foremothers' blood, sweat, and tears enabled this land to be as it is, and I have a right to be part of that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I love that. My next question was going to ask you about the theme of reclaiming narratives of Black History Month and that how that plays into your work, but I think you've perfectly expressed that and executed that in your response when you were just talking about reclaiming nature
Yeah. But
and
I also think on top of that, Kayla, and I'm also the president of the Association of Black Psychologists in the UK. And our conference this year is about reclaiming our divine African knowing, being, belonging, and doing. So it all kind of really ties together. There seems to be a theme about this thing about reclaiming, but I really do think we need to be careful about what is it that we are reclaiming? What is it about our divine sense of self are we needing to re-engage with, reconnect with, in order that we can do some of that reclaiming? That there's another conference or presentation I've been asked to do, and that word reclaiming is also in it. So I think there is something about us reminding ourselves. And one of the forefathers of the National Association of Black Psychologists, Dr. Baba Wade Nobles, through the lockdown, set out these 5 R's. And one of them was, the first thing was about reclaiming, reminding, reimagining, restoring, and reviving, all in relation to that African spirit, that Africanness of us that has, absolutely the potential to restore those things that are either buried and I don't think they're lost, because I don't think it can never, I think because it's innate.
Yeah, I don't think it
I
can ever
really
be
don't
lost
believe it's a
either.
thing of it being lost. It's about rediscovering it.
That's right.
And reimagining it and reinventing self through it and with it. So you have lovely young sisters like the woman that you talked about, supporting young people in nature. There is lots of beautiful groups, organizations that are being formed to kind of really reinvigorate and reimagine, our Africanness and our African selves and knowing and way of being. So it's kind of beholden for, as you kind of mature in years, as I have, making room for the youngest to come through with their initiatives and ideas to be, because we're only passing through.
We are only. I
We're
love that.
passing
We're
through.
only passing
We're
through.
only passing through. So on our journey to passing through, we have to make way and bring others along with us in order to continue the work of, the likes of Sojourner Truth, Malcolm X, Bob Marley, Martin Luther King, Nanny of the Maroons. That they paved the way for our forefathers and mothers' generations. I think of the legacy of my grandmother and my mother and myself, and then in through my daughter, and then my future grandchildren to come. We've got to continue to make way and make space for them to come through.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a beautiful note to end on, Clancy.
Oh, bless you.